The day Mara Ellis discovered that her mother had emptied the account meant to buy her first home, only $23.61 remained. But that was not the worst thing waiting for her. By sunset, she would believe the father of her unborn child had abandoned her. Her sister would be carrying a secret paid for with stolen money, and the family Mara had rescued for 7 years would explain why her future belonged to them. 8 months earlier, none of that seemed possible. Mara was finishing a 14-hour shift at Evergreen Women's Hospital when a 19-year-old mother stared at the emergency contact form as if it were a test she had failed. "I don't have anyone," the girl whispered. Mara pulled a chair beside the bed. Frightened people often needed silence before advice. "The person on that line doesn't have to share your last name," she said. "It only has to be someone who will answer when you call." The girl looked up. "What if nobody does?" Mara smiled. "Then we find someone who will." For most of her adult life, Mara had been that person for everyone else. When her parents fell behind on property taxes, she paid them. When her father wrecked his car, she covered what insurance refused to pay. When her sister Becca needed another round of fertility medication, Mara transferred money before anyone finished asking. She recorded every amount in a green cloth-bound ledger in a drawer. Not because she planned to collect it. Not because she wanted gratitude. She needed proof that the reason she never moved forward was not laziness, bad luck, or failure. It was subtraction. At 30, Mara had saved almost $60,000 for a townhouse in Ballard. It was narrow, small enough that the upstairs hallway creaked. Mara loved it immediately. The kitchen window faced west. The second bedroom caught the morning light. For the first time, she imagined a life in which every paycheck did not arrive already, claimed by somebody else's emergency. She met Julian Cross one Monday. His aunt, Naomi Cross, had collapsed during a maritime fundraiser and arrived at Evergreen surrounded by 6 men in dark coats. 2 blocked the corridor. 3 stood around the bed. 1 spoke into an earpiece while Naomi's heart rate climbed. Mara checked the monitor, then faced them. Everyone except one family representative leaves now. Nobody moved. Near the window stood a tall man in a charcoal suit, his expression controlled enough to make the others nervous. "They are security," he said. "She is my patient," Mara replied. "Her blood pressure is rising because your team is watching her breathe." One guard frowned. "We are not strangers." Her nervous system disagrees. For 3 seconds, the room held still. Then the man by the window turned toward the door. Every guard obeyed. Naomi's blood pressure began falling within minutes. Julian remained because Mara permitted one relative to stay. He did not interrupt or demand updates before she had them. When Naomi slept, Mara handed him water. "You should drink. I'm not the patient. You look like you haven't slept since Friday. It is Monday." That wasn't a denial. Something shifted near his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. 2 days later, Mara left the hospital and found him waiting beside a black sedan. "No security?" she asked. Julian glanced across the street. 2 men pretending to study a parking meter looked away. "Dinner," he said. Mara folded her arms. That sounded like an instruction. He paused. "Would you have dinner with me?" "Better." Their relationship did not begin with fireworks. It began with corrections. Julian took her to a restaurant where the menu had no prices. Mara later took him to a 24-hour diner where the waitress called everyone honey. He asked why she became a nurse. She asked why every room changed when he entered. He learned she hated expensive gifts and people who solved problems she had not asked them to solve. When a kitchen cabinet pulled away from her wall, Julian offered to replace the kitchen. Mara handed him a screwdriver. "Fix the part that is broken." He studied her. "You say that as if it applies to more than cabinets." "It usually does." 3 months later, he told her the truth. Cross-maritime controlled freight terminals, warehouses, private security contracts, and inherited arrangements absent from official reports. Some were unethical, others were criminal. Since his father's death, Julian had been dismantling the worst operations, creating enemies inside the company. Mara set down her fork. "Have you hurt people?" "Yes." "Do you still?" Julian did not hide behind a softer answer. "When I believe there is no other way." Mara left alone. He did not follow, send flowers, or appear at her apartment. 9 days later, she called him. "If I stay, you don't get to lie and call it protection." Silence filled the line before he answered. If the truth costs me you, I tell it anyway. 6 months after their first meeting, Mara stood in her bathroom holding a pregnancy test marked by 2 pink lines. Julian arrived 22 minutes after her call. He saw the test, then looked at her. "What do you want?" he asked. "The baby," Mara whispered. Julian lowered his head, as if accepting an oath. "Then I have to become someone our child will never need to fear." That night, Mara imagined the townhouse again. Julian making coffee in the west, facing kitchen, a crib in the room with morning light, and a front door no one could open without her permission. Julian planned to meet her family the following Saturday. Neither knew that one of his private calls had been copied, or that a man inside Cross Maritime was preparing a future in which Julian disappeared and Mara was left alone. If you were Mara, would Julian's honesty make you trust him, or would you walk away before his dangerous world could reach your child? Julian Cross's last voicemail reached Mara's phone at 10:47 on Thursday night, but only 12 seconds survived. "Mara, the meeting changed. Do not come to the terminal. Call Naomi at the number I gave you. I will explain everything when—" The message ended with breaking glass, static, and a sound Mara would later recognize as gunfire. She was asleep on her couch, with one hand over the life inside her, unaware that Julian's SUV had been trapped between a burning truck and 2 unmarked vehicles near the port of Tacoma. The second impact shattered the rear window. Bullets tore through the glass. By the time federal agents arrived, 2 men were dead, the attackers were gone, and Julian lay unconscious beside the open door. His head injury caused dangerous swelling. Under federal protection, he was moved to a private facility under another name. Before sunrise, Marcus Vane took temporary control of Cross Maritime, restricted access to Julian's records, disconnected his number, and began rewriting the future. Mara woke at 5:12 and called Julian before listening to the voicemail. The number was no longer in service. She played the message twice. She called Naomi Cross, but the number Julian had given her went directly to an automated recording. At 6:03, an email arrived from Julian's private account. "Mara," it began, "circumstances have changed. My family requires my presence overseas, and continuing our relationship is no longer possible. Do not contact me again. A financial arrangement will be made if necessary." The sentences were formal and cold. Julian had promised that if the truth cost him her, he would tell it anyway. The email sounded like a man keeping that promise cruelly. She replied with one question. "Are you safe?" The message bounced back. At 7:18, while Mara dressed for work, her lender called. "Miss Ellis, we need to discuss activity in your deposit account." Mara opened the banking application. Her balance should have been $58,963.61. The screen showed $23.61. A transfer for $58,940 had been completed the previous afternoon. Authorized user, Judith Ellis. Years earlier, her mother had been added as a secondary signer. She had forgotten to remove her. "Can you reverse it?" The lender explained that the money had already left the receiving account. Without it, Mara could not close on the Ballard townhouse Monday. By 8:10, she was parked outside the property. The townhouse looked exactly as it had during the inspection. Gray siding, narrow windows, and a maple tree beside the steps. Her real estate agent stood near the entrance with another couple. The pending sale notice was being removed. Mara watched strangers enter the home where she had imagined a crib. She placed the sample key inside the glove compartment and drove to her parents' house. Judith's sedan, Becca and Owen's car, and Thomas's truck were already there. Mara entered without knocking. Family photographs covered the hallway. Becca's wedding, Judith receiving an award, Thomas holding a retirement plaque. Mara appeared mostly at the edges. Judith sat at the dining table with a folder before her. Becca and Owen occupied opposite ends of the sofa. Thomas stood at the window. Mara placed her phone beside the folder. "Who took my money?" No one answered. $58,940. "Who took it?" Judith folded her hands. "I did. You knew I was closing Monday. I knew Becca's clinic required payment yesterday." Mara looked at her sister. Becca's face was pale, her eyes swollen from weeks of injections. "That was my home." Judith remained composed. "It was money in a family account. It was money I earned. And you can earn it again. The sentence entered the room like a verdict. Mara opened her green ledger. Property taxes, Dad's car, your charity shortage, medication, procedures, repairs. I have been earning it again for 7 years. Judith glanced at the pages. Now love requires receipts? No, theft does. Thomas turned from the window. Watch your tone. Mara faced him. Did you know? His silence answered first. Yes. Why didn't you stop her? Thomas exhaled. Because Becca had one viable embryo left. You always recover, Mara. Your sister does not. Mara looked at Becca. When did you find out? Becca twisted a tissue between her fingers. 3 days before the transfer. And you let them use it? I was going to cancel. But you didn't. Mom said you would understand if it worked. Something inside Mara became still. Her mother had taken the money. Her father had permitted it. Her sister had used it. 3 decisions, arranged like one unavoidable tragedy. And if it fails? Mara asked. Becca lowered her eyes. Judith pushed back her chair. Enough. Your sister has suffered losses you cannot understand. Mara rested one hand over her abdomen. There is something you don't know. I'm pregnant. Becca's tissue stopped moving. Thomas stared. Judith's first expression was not joy. It was calculation. With Julian Cross's child? Yes. Where is he? Mara swallowed. I don't know. Judith's mouth tightened. Then he abandoned you. I said I don't know. You are carrying a child for a dangerous man who disappeared, and you accuse your family of betrayal? Mara almost laughed. My money disappeared from an account with your name on it. Judith stood. You need time to think clearly. You cannot stay here while speaking to me this way. Thomas looked down. Becca began crying. Owen said nothing. Judith removed Mara's spare key from the hook beside the kitchen door and placed it on the table. Mara did not reach for it. She closed the ledger, lifted her bag, and left with $23.61, one unborn child, and nowhere to sleep. Every shelter she called was full. At 12:36 inches the morning, a retired midwife named Ruth Calder answered and asked, Do you need someone to tell you this is terrible, or do you need somewhere safe before sunrise? Ruth Calder arrived at the bus station at 1:18 inches the morning, wearing a navy raincoat over flowered pajamas and carrying a paper cup of tea she had forgotten to drink. She found Mara beneath the departure board with one suitcase and her nursing bag. Ruth did not ask why a pregnant woman had nowhere to sleep. She took the suitcase and said, My pharmacy is 10 minutes away. The room is ugly, but the lock works. Calder's pharmacy stood between a laundromat and a bakery. Behind the shelves was a narrow storage room with a folding bed, an old desk, and a window facing a brick wall. To Mara, it looked safer than anywhere she had been that day. You can stay until we find something better. I can pay you after my next shift. You can pay me by not arguing at 2 in the morning. Mara slept for 3 hours, reported to the hospital at 7, and spent 12 hours teaching new parents how to hold babies, while trying not to think about the family that had taken her home before she entered it. Ruth refused to let exhaustion become Mara's permanent plan. She helped her apply for temporary housing, hospital hardship assistance, and nutrition benefits. She also offered weekend work visiting women who had recently given birth. She knew which mothers needed medical attention, which needed food, and which needed someone to sit beside them without asking why their families had disappeared. Mara began with 3 clients. One woman needed her blood pressure checked after a dangerous delivery. Another was recovering from surgery while her husband worked nights. A third cried every evening when the apartment became quiet. Mara brought a scale, a blood pressure cuff, feeding supplies, and the calm voice she used at the hospital. She charged what people could manage. Sometimes it was $60. Sometimes it was soup. Ruth printed cream-colored cards that read Harbor Night Postpartum Care. Beneath the name, Mara added one sentence, No mother is turned away for arriving alone. The work did not replace the townhouse, Julian, or the money her family had taken, but it gave each day a shape that belonged to her. Then Elaine called. Becca's final embryo transfer had failed. Judith had contacted clinics in 3 states, demanding another option, while Becca had stopped answering the bedroom door. Mara sat behind the pharmacy after the call, listening to rain strike the fire escape. She remembered Becca climbing through her window with hot chocolate after an argument. She remembered the sister who once knew when silence meant pain. "Are you going to call her?" Ruth asked. Mara shook her head. "I need to know she is safe. I don't need to pretend she didn't help steal from me." Ruth nodded. Compassion and access are not the same thing. Lucy Ellis was born on a windy Tuesday morning after 18 hours of labor. Mara had expected fear, but the first sound her daughter made silenced everything else. Lucy weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, with dark hair and a serious expression that made Ruth laugh. When the hospital clerk handed Mara the emergency contact form, she paused over the empty line. Then she wrote Ruth called her. Ruth looked at the name and blinked quickly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Mara said. "That is why I did." Across the city, Julian Cross opened his eyes in a secured medical facility with no understanding of how many weeks had passed. Marcus Vane sat beside the bed with a folder containing an edited recording of Mara's voice. In it, she appeared to accept money and say she wanted no further contact. Marcus also showed him records suggesting Mara had crossed into Canada. Julian listened twice. His voice was weak when he answered. "Find her anyway." Without Marcus's knowledge, he sent Daniel Ruiz, one of the few employees he trusted. Daniel discovered that Mara remained in Washington and had recently given birth. He never delivered the report. His car was found near an abandoned rail yard, the driver's door open and his phone missing. 4 months later, Harbor Night had 19 regular clients and referrals from a community clinic. Mara and Lucy lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a bookstore. It was crowded, but the lease carried Mara's name, and nobody else had a key. Judith appeared at Calder's pharmacy on a Friday afternoon carrying a white gift bag. "I brought clothes for the baby." Mara remained in the doorway. "What do you want?" "To meet my granddaughter. You removed me from your house while I was pregnant." Judith lowered her eyes. "I was angry. You were in control." Lucy stirred against Mara's chest. Judith's face softened with something that looked real. That was the dangerous part. Mara allowed a 15-minute visit. Judith could not hold Lucy, take photographs, or discuss Becca. For several weeks, she obeyed every rule. Then she asked to visit again, and later requested permission to bring Becca. Becca stood near the pharmacy door with both hands locked together. She looked thinner than Mara remembered. When she saw Lucy, grief crossed her face so openly that Mara almost looked away. "She is beautiful," Becca whispered. She did not ask to touch her. That restraint earned another visit. Slowly, the boundaries moved. Becca bought Lucy a winter coat. Judith offered to pay for diapers. Owen apologized without defending himself. When Mara received an appointment with a community grant officer, Becca offered to watch Lucy for 2 hours. Ruth would remain nearby. Mara hesitated, then agreed. She returned to find Becca sitting on the rug, singing softly while Lucy slept against her shoulder. For one hopeful moment, Mara saw the sister she had lost. The next morning, Elaine sent a screenshot from Becca's private social media page. The photograph showed Becca holding Lucy beneath the words, "Sometimes the child meant for you arrives through a door you never expected." Nowhere did Becca identify herself as Lucy's aunt. Becca deleted the photograph within minutes. But by then, Judith had shared it with board members at Family First Northwest and added a message about the ways families were healed. Mara called her sister at dawn. "Why did you write that?" Becca sounded wounded. "I never said Lucy was mine." "You let people believe it." "For one moment, I wanted to know what it felt like." Mara closed her eyes. "She is not a feeling you get to borrow." The photograph disappeared, but the idea behind it did not. At a charity luncheon 2 weeks later, Judith introduced Lucy as the little girl our family was given after a year of loss. Mara corrected her in front of donors. "Lucy is my daughter. She was not given to a committee." Judith smiled until they reached the parking lot. Then her voice hardened. "You embarrassed me. You introduced my child as family property. You are becoming suspicious of people who love you." "No, I am becoming accurate." Mara reduced every visit after that. Becca could see Lucy only at Calder's pharmacy, with Ruth present, and Judith was no longer permitted to attend. 3 days later, the Community Foundation, reviewing Harbor Night's grant, requested an emergency meeting. The program officer placed 6 photographs across the conference table. One showed Mara entering Evergreen before a night shift. Another showed Ruth carrying Lucy from the apartment. A third showed Lucy arriving at licensed daycare. There were pictures of Mara loading medical supplies, leaving the pharmacy after dark, and speaking to a man outside the hospital. These were submitted anonymously, the officer said. The sender claims you are rarely with your daughter, and that Harbor Night is being operated by an exhausted, financially unstable parent. Mara studied the images. Each one was true. Together, they had been arranged into a lie. My shifts are scheduled. Lucy is either with licensed childcare or Ruth. I believe you, but the foundation has paused the application while we review the allegations. Mara left with copies of every photograph. That evening, Elaine arrived at Mara's apartment carrying a grocery bag that contained no groceries. She locked the door behind her and removed printed screenshots, emails, and a photograph from the bag. Your mother added me to a family message thread by mistake, she said. The messages described a consultation with a family law specialist. Judith had called Mara emotionally depleted, financially unstable, and connected to a dangerous absentee father. Becca had asked what would happen if Mara refused temporary guardianship. Judith had replied, "She will understand after she sees what is best for Lucy." Mara read the sentence twice. Then Elaine handed her the photograph. It showed a nursery inside Becca and Owen's house. The walls were green. A white crib stood beneath wooden letters spelling Lucy. Drawers were filled with folded infant clothes. "How long has this room existed?" Mara asked. "At least 6 weeks." Elaine placed another document on the table. It was a receipt for a certified copy of Lucy's birth certificate. Judith's name appeared as the requester. Mara did not cry. Fear entered too deeply for tears. "They are not preparing to help me." Elaine's voice broke. "No, they are preparing to replace you." The next morning, Mara met Naomi Price, a family law attorney recommended by the hospital. Naomi was compact, silver-haired, and unimpressed by panic. She reviewed the screenshots without interrupting. "From now on, nobody in your family receives unsupervised access. Lock Lucy's medical, daycare, and identity records. Save every message. Do not warn them about the evidence. Can they take her? Not because you work nights or rent an apartment. But false claims become dangerous when they are repeated consistently." Naomi closed the file. "There is something else." A representative for Julian Cross requested a confidential meeting. Mara's pulse changed. "Julian is alive?" According to the documents they provided. "Yes." Mara agreed to meet only in Naomi's office. Julian arrived without guards. He was thinner than she remembered, with a scar near his temple and stiffness when he lowered himself into the chair. He placed a folder on the table but did not push it toward her. "I can prove I did not choose to leave." Mara looked at him for a long moment. "That does not mean I was not left." His eyes lowered. "No." He explained the attack, the coma, Marcus Vane's control of his communications, the edited recording, and the false travel records. Server logs showed that Marcus had sent the email ending their relationship. Federal investigators had connected the attack to companies Marcus secretly controlled. Julian also described Daniel Ruiz, the employee who had found Mara and disappeared before delivering his report. He did not ask for sympathy. "My world reached you even while I was unconscious," he said. "That is still my responsibility." Mara read every document. The evidence was strong, but evidence could restore facts more quickly than trust. She agreed to a legal DNA test. 6 days later, the result confirmed Julian's paternity with a probability greater than 99.99%. He asked when he could meet Lucy. Mara set 4 conditions. No armed security near her daughter, no expensive gifts, no decisions without Mara's consent, no threats against the Ellis family. Julian agreed before she finished. Their first visit lasted 40 minutes at Naomi's office. Lucy watched him from Mara's lap, while Julian sat on the floor, keeping his hands still. During the third visit, Lucy leaned forward and raised both arms. Julian's instinct moved him halfway toward her, then stopped. He looked at Mara. Only after she nodded did he lift his daughter. That night, Mara received a cream envelope from Judith, inviting her to a family settlement dinner. Judith promised to return part of the stolen money and discuss a peaceful arrangement for Lucy. Naomi read the invitation and said, "It is a trap." Mara placed it beside the photographs. "I know. I am going anyway, but this time they will not control the record." The dining room at Cascadia House overlooked Elliott Bay, but Mara never looked at the water. On the table lay a temporary guardianship agreement, an open adoption contract, a cashier's check for $20,000, a 6-month apartment lease in Portland, and a resignation letter addressed to Evergreen Women's Hospital. Judith had not invited her daughter to dinner. She had prepared Mara's disappearance. Julian waited downstairs with Naomi Price. Mara had given him one instruction: do not enter unless I send the message. She took the chair facing the door and placed her phone beside her glass. A red symbol showed the recording had begun. Judith folded her napkin. We are offering you stability. You are offering me money for my daughter. Do not make this uglier than it needs to be. Becca sat beside Owen, her hands hidden. Thomas stared at the documents as if they had appeared. Judith pushed the Portland lease toward Mara. 6 months of rent is paid. You could transfer to a hospital there, finish recovering financially, and visit Lucy whenever everyone agrees it is appropriate. Everyone? Mara asked. You mean everyone except her mother? Thomas cleared his throat. This is meant to be a compromise. A compromise happens between people with equal rights. None of you have rights to trade. Becca looked up. We would never keep you away completely. How generous. Becca flinched, but Judith continued. You work nights. You live in a 1-bedroom apartment. Your business grant has been suspended, and Lucy's father is connected to dangerous people. Becca and Owen have a home, time, and a stable marriage. Owen's eyes shifted toward Becca. I thought we were discussing temporary help. Judith did not look at him. We are discussing what is best for Lucy. Mara touched the screen of her phone. This conversation is being recorded and transmitted to my attorney. Judith's expression hardened. You came expecting a fight. I came prepared for one. Mara opened a folder and placed Becca's social media post on the table. Next came the anonymous photographs sent to the foundation. Then the family messages Elaine had preserved, the certified birth certificate receipt, and the photograph of the nursery with Lucy's name above the crib. Owen picked it up. You told me that room was for storage. Becca whispered. I was going to explain. Mara added the custody consultant's intake form. This says I leave Lucy overnight without reliable care, suffer from postpartum instability, and allow violent men near her. Every statement is false. Judith lifted her chin. The consultant asked about possible risks. You invented them. Mara placed hospital schedules, daycare records, Ruth's childcare log, and a letter from her physician beside the form. Every overnight shift was scheduled. Lucy was always with licensed care or Ruth. I have never been diagnosed with a condition that affects my parenting. Thomas rubbed his forehead. Mara, your mother may have exaggerated because she was worried. Who photographed my apartment? Nobody answered. Who followed Lucy to daycare? Becca closed her eyes. Who contacted the foundation and threatened the work I built? Judith's fingers tightened around her glass. I gathered information. You manufactured evidence. I protected my granddaughter. From what? Mara asked. A mother who works? A rented apartment? A woman you failed to make homeless permanently? Judith struck the table with her palm. From chaos. From a criminal father who vanished before she was born. Mara sent the message. The door opened less than 30 seconds later. Julian entered alone, moving with the stiffness his injuries had left behind. He looked at Mara. She nodded. Only then did he approach the table. Judith stared at him. Thomas stood halfway before sitting again. Julian placed a sealed laboratory report beside Mara's records. I am Lucy's father. The test confirms it. Judith found her voice. You abandoned them. I was attacked near the Tacoma terminal and kept unconscious under federal protection. Marcus Vane intercepted every communication between us. He opened a second folder containing medical records, server logs, the original voicemail, and federal evidence connecting Marcus to the attack. The email ending our relationship was fabricated. The recording sent to me was edited. Mara accepted no payment from me or my company. Becca looked at Mara. He did not choose to leave? No, Mara said. That does not erase what happened while he was gone. Respect moved across Julian's face. He turned to Thomas and Owen. Your credit union pension fund and Owen's construction company both have contracts connected to Cross Maritime. I will not use those connections against you. Financial coercion remains coercion, even when someone claims the victim deserves it. Judith's confidence faltered. She had expected a threat. His restraint left her nowhere to hide. Owen faced Becca. Tell me everything." Becca shook her head. "Tell me." Her shoulders collapsed. "I knew about the money before the transfer. I knew Mom was collecting pictures. I kept the birth certificate. I helped prepare the nursery." Owen stared at her. "You said the legal consultation ended." "I lied." Becca began crying. "I told myself Mara would agree when she saw how much we loved Lucy. I told myself she could have another child. I repeated it until it stopped sounding cruel." Mara's voice remained steady. "Wanting to be a mother does not give you the right to erase one. I was grieving. Your grief deserves treatment. Lucy is not treatment." Judith rose. "This man has manipulated you with money and fear." Julian did not move. "She survived, gave birth, and built Harbor Night before I found her. Do not turn her strength into my achievement." Mara gathered the birth records, guardianship papers, adoption contract, and resignation letter. She left the check on the table. At the door, Julian walked beside her without touching her. Mara reached for his hand first. Before midnight, Naomi filed emergency restrictions blocking Judith and Becca from Lucy's medical, childcare, and identity records. At 8:12 the next morning, Judith received a separate demand for every dollar she had taken. Judith received Naomi Price's demand letter at 8:12 on Monday morning. It required repayment of the $58,940 she had taken, the inspection fee Mara lost, the cancelled closing costs, and attorney expenses. Total due: $68,412. The letter also stated that repayment would not restore contact with Lucy. By Wednesday, Judith and Becca had withdrawn every guardianship and adoption document. The custody consultant submitted a signed statement confirming that Judith had described Mara as unstable, absent, and financially incapable without providing evidence. Evergreen Women's Hospital verified Mara's employment record, Ruth supplied childcare logs, and the Community Foundation restored Harbor Night's grant application. None of it felt like victory to Mara. Victory would have been keeping the house, trusting her family, and watching Julian meet Lucy before she learned to sit. What remained was accountability, and accountability was slower. Becca sold her car, jewelry, and designer handbags to make the first substantial payment. She entered a therapy program for women facing infertility and pregnancy loss. Owen moved into a furnished apartment near his construction office. "I grieved with you," he told her, "but somewhere along the way, grief became permission." Thomas admitted that he had known Judith's plan was wrong, and had remained silent because opposing her would have required courage. He agreed to monthly payments from his pension. Judith's charity board then discovered she had told donors that Mara voluntarily funded Becca's treatment. Family First Northwest placed her on leave before accepting her resignation. Judith called Mara and accused her of destroying the family. Mara answered once, "I did not destroy a family. I stopped protecting a system that required my silence." Then she blocked the number. Julian's consequences arrived through federal investigators rather than family court. The evidence he provided connected Marcus Vane to the terminal attack, Daniel Ruiz's disappearance, shell companies, and years of illegal payments hidden inside cross-maritime contracts. Marcus was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Julian surrendered assets tied to smuggling operations, closed 2 unlicensed security divisions, and accepted independent financial oversight. Several executives called him weak. One suggested that Judith could be frightened into silence. Julian removed the man before he finished speaking. "Mara decides the boundary," he said. "Not you, not me." He never asked Mara to praise him for dismantling harm he had inherited and once tolerated. He simply appeared when invited. He attended parenting classes, learned Lucy's feeding schedule, and waited outside pediatric appointments until Mara opened the door. When Lucy developed a fever at 2 in the morning, Julian arrived carrying infant medicine, 3 blankets, and diapers 2 sizes too large. Mara held up the package. "These are for toddlers." The number was bigger, he said. "I assumed bigger meant better. That is not how babies work." Julian stared at the diapers as if they had betrayed him, and Mara laughed before she could stop herself. Trust did not return through grand promises. It returned through ordinary mistakes that did not require fear. 4 months after the dinner, Harbor Night received its grant. Ruth found a storefront near the pharmacy with 3 consultation rooms, a small nursery, and a kitchen where exhausted parents could eat without explaining why they had forgotten. Mara funded the center through her hospital income, the grant, and the first settlement payments. Julian paid for a lawyer to review the lease only after Mara asked. He installed security cameras only after she approved every location. Above the entrance, a sign read, "Harbor Night Postpartum Care. No mother recovers alone." On opening morning, Mara placed the green ledger in a locked drawer beneath the reception desk. Its first pages recorded property taxes, fertility medication, car repairs, and money her family had taken. Its final pages listed 6 free home visits, 2 emergency childcare partners, and 1 scholarship for a nursing student who had recently become a mother. The record no longer ended with loss. Becca's letter arrived 3 weeks later. She did not ask for forgiveness. She wrote that she had treated her grief like an invoice and expected Mara to pay it with money, silence, and eventually Lucy. Mara read the letter twice and placed it inside the ledger. Months later, she agreed to meet Becca in a public garden. Becca did not bring gifts or ask to hold Lucy. "I am learning that wanting something desperately does not make it mine," she said. Mara studied her sister. That is not forgiveness, but it is where honesty can begin. Judith changed more slowly. After a year of counseling and consistent payments, Mara allowed brief video calls. Later, she permitted supervised visits at Harbor Night. During the first visit, Judith began. "I only wanted—" Mara stopped her. "No explanations today." Judith lowered her eyes. "I was wrong. Nothing I say makes it smaller." It was not reconciliation, but it was the first sentence Judith had spoken without demanding that Mara carry part of her guilt. 18 months after losing the Ballard townhouse, Mara purchased a small home on Harbor Street with Julian. Their ownership percentages were written clearly. Their private accounts remained separate. Every document carried Mara's name. Julian proposed after Lucy fell asleep, without cameras, flowers, or an audience. Mara accepted the engagement, not a deadline. On their first night, Julian attempted to assemble Lucy's new bed without reading the instructions. One side leaned inward, and a wooden rail faced backward. Lucy sat on the floor, holding the manual upside down. "I manage thousands of employees," Julian said. "This bed is defeating me." Mara sat beside him and opened the booklet. "Then we read the instructions together." Near the front door hung 3 keys. One for Mara, one for Julian, and one for Ruth. There were no copies for Judith or Becca. Not yet. Mara finally understood that forgiveness was not unlimited access, and family was not defined by who demanded a key. It was defined by who respected the door when it stayed closed.